Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to CPRA's second webinar on reopening facilities and today's topic of reopening aquatic facilities. My name is Krista Costas-Bradstreet. I'm the Director of Partnerships and Policy for the Canadian Parks and Recreation Association. And again, we're really thrilled to be welcoming such a large group and also all across the country. So obviously an important topic to many of you across the country. Before we delve into the actual webinar topic, my colleague Lane Wilson and I want to do a brief introduction of CPRA and some of our efforts around COVID-19. So in terms of our next slide, Canadian Parks and Recreation Association is a national organization dedicated to realizing the full potential of parks and recreation as a major contributor to community health and vibrancy. It's been around for 60 years, and as you see on this slide, we have 3 strategic goals. So we are the national voice for parks and recreation, advancing the collective interests of our members. CPRA is a national network dedicated to the well-being of people, communities, and the natural and built environment. And finally, CPRA provides services for our members and partners that cultivate dialogue, learning, and innovation. In terms of who we really are our collective experience and expertise of a network of 13 provincial and territorial associations, again, across the country. Their board members and their staff help to support all of our strategic goals and priorities. We work with volunteers, government partners, allied sectors, all helping again to contribute to moving the strategic goals forward. And we have a very small staff, all spread out across the country. We have a CEO, we have a Director of Policy and Partnership, myself, Director of Programs, Director of Communications, and an Administrator. And that is MJ Akonde, and she is on the phone with us today. And she helps to ensure that the webinars run as smoothly as possible. In terms of COVID-19, so our next slide. Obviously, over the past 3 months, CPRA, like many organizations across the country, has really had to shift its focus to the current circumstances. So this is just talking a little bit about some of the work that we've been doing around COVID-19. We established weekly calls with our PT members, so those 13 provincial and territorial organizations that I mentioned, so that we could hear what was happening regionally across the country and identify the needs that the sector may have. We've monitored, updated, and guided our partners on federal government aid programs. We've been actually actively advocating the federal government for different financial supports for the sector, both in the immediate phase that took place and now as we're all talking about recovery. We work with some national partners to also align our messages and our advocacy efforts. We've been trying to share as much information on social media and then provide tools to the sector, for example, these webinars that we're doing this series of 6 with. So a great deal that we're trying to do, but we're always interested in some of the other ways that we can support you. So I'm going to just turn the next slide over and a little bit more on our COVID efforts to Lane. As I mentioned, Lane is a graduate of the University of Manitoba's Bachelor of Recreation Management and Community Development undergrad degree program. She's currently the recreation facilitator for the rural municipality of Rockwood and the town of Stonewall, which she also calls home. And she is the president of Rec Connections Manitoba and serves on our CPRA board of directors. Thanks, Lane.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Krista. So I'm just going to do a really brief piece of this and just welcome you to the webinar. We're thrilled to be able to offer these and thrilled to have participation from across our nation. Especially during a time when we all have to be apart. I'm super thankful, and I know the board is really thankful at any opportunities that we and moments that we have that we can come together and support each other. So these webinars are meant to complement the work that's going on in our provinces and territories because we know lots of really good stuff is happening, but just to bring a national flavor to it, to unite people when we can, sort of thing. So, and another piece that CPRA is doing is the shared drive, which is this slide for COVID support. So there's lots of really great resources on there. And there is a portal coming as well with lots of lots of stuff, you know, job boards and sharing some education pieces and resources and like I said, connecting people across our great country. So I'm going to turn it back to Krista, and thank you for participating in this. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Lane. I'm really excited about our presentation today. I think we have a great panel of speakers. So what I'd like to do is just introduce our first two speakers. They're going to share the presentation through, from the Life Saving Society. So we have two today. Eric Hervieux has worked in aquatics for the past 15 years, currently serving as the director of a nonprofit organization that specializes in the operations of sport infrastructure, including 2 indoor pools and outdoor pools near Montreal. Eric is a longtime volunteer for the Life Saving Society, having developed many programs in Quebec. He's been part of the Safety Standard Commission for the past 3 years, and he's now the commissioner of this committee. He has been intimately involved in the reopening of aquatic facilities both in Quebec and nationally. Michael Shane is the Safety Standards and Management Training Director for the Life Saving Society. He has been employed by the Society for over 40 years, and prior to that, he worked in aquatics in Mississauga and Brampton, Ontario. Michael is the past president of the Aquatic branch of Parks and Recreation Ontario. Michael has delivered presentations provincially, nationally, and internationally. Michael is the designated water safety expert for the Life Saving Society in coroners and civil court settings. So I'm thrilled to have you both. Thank you so much for being here today, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Krista. Hi, everybody. Thank you for attending the CPRA webinar, and hope your family, friends, and yourself are doing well. It's a pleasure to be with you today. As mentioned, my name is Eric, and I'm the Commissioner for the Safety Standard Commission and National Life Saving Society Commission. Let me begin by presenting the SSC and the work it has done to help its affiliates in reopening their aquatic facilities on a national point of view. The Life Saving Society Canada's Safety Standard Commission contribute to the mission of the Society by setting evidence-based standards and best practices to prevent drowning and water-related injuries, and to optimize safety in, on, and around aquatic environments. At this time, the Safety Standard Commission has 3 areas of focus to help achieve this mandate. To do so, we produce 5 research-based standards annually based on industry needs. Also, we revise 5 existing standards annually based on a 5-year review. And finally, we work with the branches to leverage Canada's aquatic safety standard positioning to the benefit of the Society and its programs, activities, and services. Next slide, please. So this is our group. It's made of volunteers and staff members from across Canada. We have representatives from every branch, so do not hesitate to contact them if you need any information. They are great references and have a lot of knowledge to share. At first, we have Wendy. She is the LSC representative. Myself, Patrick, the past commissioner. We have in BC, Cheryl and Sean. In Alberta, Rachel and Norm. In Saskatchewan, Shelby. Manitoba, we have Chris. In Ontario, we have Mike that will be speaking after me, and Lisa. In Quebec, François. For the Atlantic, we have Paul. And we have national partners such as Agnes and Caroline that participate in the group. Next. So the current situation. Here we are presenting the current situation. In fact, this is not so much current anymore since things tend to change so fast. It was when we were preparing the presentation last week. So as you can see, many provinces got to go ahead to restart some kind of activities, and others are still waiting. In addition to those that you can see, I know that in the last updates we got, Quebec is now allowed to open indoor pools and waterfront starting next Monday. I also know that there's been some movement in the Atlantic region, and if I'm correct, I do not think any water parks are allowed to be open as of now, except in New Brunswick. So these are the last information that we gathered. Next, thank you. Nationally, the Life Saving Society Standard Commission creates information bulletin to assist with reopening. To do so, we have been looking at the best practices and guidelines that we found both across Canada and internationally. If you go to the Life Saving Society's website, you'll find that there are 4 sections under the safety management services. The 3 first present various standards that were available before the COVID pandemic. I will just take a second to present them to you so you see what information is already available out there. Next slide, please. As you can see, those are all the standards that you may find that were already available. There is a wide range of subjects that were addressed in the last years, containing a goldmine of information. For each and every one of those, you'll find the standard and implementation advice. On my part, I ask all my supervisors to go through them at least when they are hired, so they really understand the prevention work that we are doing, but mostly the why we are doing certain things. Also, it helps us revise our procedures by bringing a new set of eyes on what we are doing. Next. And now, under the COVID-19 tab, you'll find many useful information. Some provincial branches have expanded this by writing reopening guides that combine those documents and by adapting their content to local realities. I strongly recommend that you consult these guides while preparing for reopening. Next. It's important to understand that some of the information presented are obligation, let's say when we are referring to CPR and first aid protocols, and that others are strategies to help the owner and the operator to restart activities. So let's see what kind of information you can find in those documents under the COVID-19 tab of the Life Saving Society. You'll find information about cleaning and disinfecting public spaces, mitigating the risk of infection while administrating CPR and first aid, aquatic staff PPEs, staff training guidelines. In this one, we address ongoing in-service training, recertification adaptation, and how to deliver lifeguard courses in a COVID context. So if you have any question about those topics, they are great resources for you. Also, the last one on the list, we have made available a guideline for progressive reopening of aquatic facilities. As shown on the slide, many subjects are presented. As I mentioned before, in this guide, we are not presenting obligation, but tips on how each owner and operator may address many of the upcoming issues. This allows everyone to adapt according to their own reality and site specification. Among the common question and site adaptation you'll have to think about, there's the maximum beta load. We received a lot of questions about it. How can I maintain physical distancing while swimming? How much bathers can I allow in my facility? Since physical distancing is the most important factor to reduce COVID transmission, every owner and operator must answer those questions. In Manitoba, health officers review their maximum beta load to 1 patron for every 10 square meters of water. This is mandatory. But in many regions, there are no numbers that are imposed. In Quebec, the Association of Aquatic Managers is recommending 1 patron for every 7 square meters of water for recreational swim. In other countries, we've seen up to 1 patron for every 10 square meters of water and as low as 1 patron for 4 square meters. It's important to note that in countries using the 2 meters physical distancing principle, like we do in Canada, all guidelines seems to be between 7 to 10 square meters per patron. But in some countries, they are recommending a physical distancing of only 1 meter, like in France, or 1.5 meters, like in Belgium and Germany. Those have the lower ratio of 4 to 6 square meters per patron. Now for lap swimming. Almost every country enforcing a physical distancing of 2 meters, like we do, only allow members of the same household to swim in a line. So this means usually that there will be only one swimmer, or a bit more if other members of the family come together. Next slide. Then you have the principle to swim in a circle. Swimming in a circle means that the swimmers will go from line 1 to the deep end and come back in the second line to the shallow end. Doing so, Swim Canada now recommends 6 swimmers per 2 lanes while swimming in circle. So this is new information that came out last Friday. Before, Swim Canada was recommending 4 swimmers per 2 lanes, but we are now up to 6 swimmers per 2 lanes. The maximum ratio that we found is 10 square meters per swimmer while swimming in circle. In order to avoid lineup and accept as many patrons as possible, some aquatic facilities have to decide to prolong opening hours or to allow patrons to refresh in the water and use the facilities for a fixed duration of time, let's say 45 to 90 minutes max. Others are prioritizing day camps on certain days and giving hours. Finally, some have decided to implement an online reservation system. Next. You'll need to adapt training sessions and swimming lessons. Here we see a group of athletes listening to their coach while maintaining physical distancing. Also, you need to educate your patrons on how to take a break while doing laps. Maybe they're going to need to turn their back to the pool to avoid facing other swimmers, and how to get in front of a slower swimmer. Next. You need to remember that you and your lifeguards will be facing patrons that will not have the same concerns about COVID-19. Some people think they can catch it while speaking to you on the phone, while others think it's an invention from the government. You need to make sure that your staff is trained and ready to assess those new PR situations that may include patrons that will refuse to comply to physical distancing or other rules. Also, there will be other issues to address, like managing day camps in groups and doing swimming tests. You might need to install a one-way circulation around the pool if the side is too narrow. Are you going to manage access to whirlpools, sauna, and steam rooms? How are you going to manage waiting lines for diving boards, water slides, and rope swings? And what about patron equipment? Will they be allowed to bring their own chair or noodle to avoid sharing equipment? And PFDs, those being essential to avoid drowning prevention, I need to be available at all times. Next. Finally, I'm going to talk about signage. Here's an example of what's done in France and while they are already operating. On the next slide, we see what's being done in Germany. So they are using the 1.5 meter physical distancing measure. So there are some differences that you will need to adapt, but it's interesting to see what they have done. They are really using the color patterns to indicate what should be done and what should be avoided. So this is an interesting way to present it. Next. So finally, this is what the Life Saving Society in Quebec has prepared for pools, waterfronts, and water parks. Hope these can inspire you in making your own. So thank you for listening to me. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to share them in the chat box on your side panel. We will have time at the end of this presentation to answer them. And now let's have Mike Shane from the Ontario's branch of the Life Saving Society and member of the Safety Standard Commission continue with his presentation.
Thanks very much, Eric. I'm going to speak specifically about some of the things going on in Ontario and some of the guidance documents that we've released for owner-operators as they prepare for opening up facilities here in Ontario. We know in this province back in April, the province released its three-phase plan to reopen the province of Ontario. And lately, we were excited to hear that as of June 12th, all of our pools were allowed to reopen in 24 regions of the province of Ontario. And as you can see by that diagram, the bottom one, that's a lot of area in Ontario, but unfortunately, some of the higher population areas were left out, mostly the GTA, Toronto GTA area, Windsor area of the province were left out in June. About a week later, we celebrated once again as 7 more regions were added. And this has been the approach in Ontario to reopen, where regions are showing good progress. They are reopened. So as of the 19th, that's today, then 7 more regions will be added to this list, only leaving Toronto, Peel, Windsor, and Essex to remain in the level 1, where no facilities will be open. And we suspect that that will continue until June the 26th, when we're hopeful the rest of the province will open and recreational swimming and non-contact lessons will begin. Next slide, please. So when we found ourselves in this position early in the winter, in the spring, and affiliates were asking for guidance and resources, we decided to start looking at what is it that we could provide for aquatic operators here in the province of Ontario. We started off by launching in April a series of webinars, which we continue to this day. Every Wednesday at 1 o'clock, we host a 1-hour webinar, the topic of the day, and give folks information and resources, much like you're seeing here today, on reopening. There's an address bar there where you can find out what webinars are still planned, and these are free. So if you're at all interested in joining in, by all means go to that site and sign in, register for it, and you'll be sent the necessary information. We are continuing these until July, and as I said, they start at 1 o'clock every day. We have allowed for them to be recorded, and we've been quite impressed where people have gone back to previous webinars and watched them again, or new people have seen them. In fact, I think the first webinar in April has been viewed over 500 times. So they serve as a good resource for staff, for folks who have listened but have forgotten maybe 1 or 2 points and want to see it again or hear it again. And again, they're all available at that website for you to view at any time. So by all means, have a look. Next slide, please. The webinars were one step. We felt that it was important to provide documentation as well. So on May 30th, we produced the Society's Guide to Reopening Pools and Waterfronts. And I believe this is as well in your handouts tab today, or will be available for you shortly as a free guide for folks to view. We were looking at, I think, trying to create some standards for owner operators. We knew the national pieces were done, and they were an excellent start for us in the creation of this guide. But we knew that the Ministry of Health here in Ontario had not released any supporting documentation or guidance. So we took the initiative to do so, and have circulated this throughout the province, including to all provincial health offices for their review as well, and use. It really does contain guidelines to assist owner operators to get things going again and really plan for a reopening. And if we go to the next slide, you'll see that the table of contents for this has many of the topics that Eric has mentioned. In fact, we were thankful that they allowed us to copy, paste, and modify where required many of the pieces that they had done. I think that operators have used this and have looked at it as a way of planning for a reopening. And so they've begun at the top by doing their inspections and facility or activity assessments. You know, what do I need to do? Where do I expect, what activities do I plan to run? And where do I expect people to move in our facility? They then turn to the programming side. Well, what do I want to offer and how am I going to do it? And then one of the most important pieces is, well, now that I'm bringing my staff back, what do I have to do? We know that this time is probably really tight, and so we've suggested that they focus on 3 areas: update them on the new policies and procedures, update them on new first aid and resuscitation protocols, and tell them all about the new PPE requirements for aquatic staff. These are the minimum that we think should be done, and this is all explained in the guide for you. Of course, owner-operators are adding their own pieces. Some have chosen to get them into the pools and test some of their skills, and that's just fine. But certainly these items will need to be reviewed. We go on to talk a bit about some of the other areas, such as facility maintenance, management of safe water, and community waterfront safety. And some of you are probably looking at that going, well, what does that have to do with reopening pools, maybe waterfronts? But it was our belief that the pools in this province were going to be slow to open. And in fact, some are still planning on delayed responses, delayed openings. And so that, in our minds, meant, well, all of those people that go swimming at pools are now going to turn to lakes and rivers to go swimming where there are no lifeguards. And we felt that it was important to provide resources for for owner-operators out there, community leaders such as yourself, to warn and educate people about the dangers of swimming in open water and how they can do so safely. And you know, unfortunately, here in Ontario, we've already had a death in the Ottawa region of a 2-year-old boy at a waterfront. And so, you know, it's our hope that some initiatives that we take will keep those numbers low this summer. There are a collection of appendices as well in this document, many of which Eric has mentioned. Go to the next slide. So I'm going to talk about a couple of the examples that are inside the guide, specifically some of the ones that we think are important or we've been getting questions about. And you know, well, the first line of defense, I suppose, is in their home. But once they leave their home, and if you haven't been able to warn and educate them, then certainly following some of these protocols might reduce your risk. And here we talk about warning and educating, questioning folks as they come in, and certainly where protocols allow even taking temperatures. So what we're trying to do here is minimize folks with certainly symptomatic evidence of COVID to not come in the pool. It's highly unlikely they would anyway if they were symptomatic, because if you're sick, you're not really feeling like swimming. But should they show up, it's our hope that steps you take will protect the other swimmers and protect the staff. Next slide, please. The other is when we created a standard for splash pads, we looked at it after publishing it and thinking, yeah, you know, we had a couple calls from operators about installing fencing at all splash pads. They had signaled that this would be very difficult for them to do. You know, we concurred and re-examined this requirement from a point of view of, well, what is the real outcome that we're trying to provide here? And that is that we want to maintain social distancing at these sites. We know children run around and play and interact, but maybe there are other ways that owner-operators can do this than through fencing, and whether or not fencing would help, we're not sure. So maybe there is website education, on-site signage, personnel, fencing, or any other system that could be put in place to control physical distancing at these splash pads. And so I think this is what we've come to realize, that look at this from an outcome point of view and allow the creativity in the communities to get to that outcome. Next slide, please. In the training side, as I said a little earlier, and so I won't spend much time on this one, time is tight, and so of course we want you to spend time focusing on the priorities of getting your pools back in operation. And these are the 3 target areas that we think are important, and if you find time, then please do so. Some of these can be done certainly online, and we would encourage that. Not all of them have to be done certainly in the pool. Next slide. Resuscitation is a pretty big one. We're fortunate in our pools because our guards are very vigilant, and we set up protocols in advance to not be faced with many incidents in our facilities that require a resuscitation. So I would précis this by these occur very few and far between, but nevertheless we still have to be prepared. So in light of that, there's some clear protocol changes that have been made to the management of a drowning victim. And on page 30 inside the guide, clearly it explains the process that we should be following based on the equipment you have in the facility and the training that you provide to your staff. Next slide. And of course, we do perform in-water rescues, maybe more often than certainly resuscitation. I would expect that. And, these are instances where lifeguards have to respond. And, here are some protocols that they can keep in mind for those responses. The goal here, of course, is to minimize exposure. Contact is going to have to be made in most cases. Certainly aids can be used, rescue aids can be used to provide assistance, but in some cases contact will be required. And this guideline on page 56 gives your staff some ideas on how that can be done safely. And next slide. And I think that's it for me. And I'll turn this back to, I think, Krista.
Yes, thanks so much, Eric and Mike. That was great information. As Eric mentioned, we will be taking some questions at the end, so please feel free to type in your questions and we'll get to as many as possible. And as well, if you have something to share about what you're doing, we ask you to type that in as well, and we'll share if we can. We can also collect this information and send it back out. There is a question about whether or not the slides will be made available, and absolutely they will after the presentation. And also, we do record the webinars and it will be available on our website, on the CPRA website. So we will have all of that available to you. So the purpose of the webinars is really to provide up-to-date information and standards where we have them, which is awesome, but also to share stories from around the country as to how organizations are tackling the reopening of facilities. And so now we're going to move from Quebec and Ontario to Nova Scotia, and I'd like to introduce Scott Preston. He is the Manager of Recreation and Aquatics for the municipality of East Hants, where he oversees the direction for recreation programming, community development, and the operations of a brand new $19 million aquatic facility in the East Hants region of Nova Scotia. He's been working in the world of aquatics in Halifax and central Nova Scotia for the past 9 years, and he sits on the board of the Life Saving Society of Nova Scotia and Water Polo Nova Scotia. So over to you, Scott. Thanks.
Thanks, Krista, and thanks to Eric and Mike and for your presentation there on the Life Saving Society, and really thank you to the whole Safety Standards Commission for making that framework and guidance for us as facility managers to make reopening really easy. So thank you so much. So I'm going to share with you my perspective on how we're planning to reopen in Nova Scotia. So why don't we go to the next page, please? So here's kind of, I guess, a quick snapshot of our timeline of events since kind of the world came to this COVID scenario, starting with a really March 17th, a very quiet St. Patrick's Day, limiting, gatherings of 50 people. And, our facilities closed there across the province. And not long after that, we were in the state of emergency, which I imagine the rest of Canada was, where our provincial parks and our beaches were closed. And so when we kind of fast forward through April, dealing with employee layoffs, our cases were kind of rising by day. People were staying safe. Everything was kind of shut down. And we hit to May 15th where, we decided to reopen public beaches. These are, unsupervised. This is from the province because people were going there anyways. And, listening to Mike and Eric, talk about the rest of Canada right now, Nova Scotia, we are, I guess, a bit behind in having any reopening plans for pools. Fitness centers have been approved, and as of this coming Monday, we're going to see most of our facilities here in Halifax and central Nova Scotia start to reopen their doors. But just to be clear, right now in Nova Scotia, private pools can open. So if you're a hotel pool or if you have a pool in your condo facility, you can open, but any public pool remains closed. So we can just flip to the next slide there. Here's just kind of a look at our province. So you guys know, we're just under 1 million people here, about half of that being in the Halifax region. So we've had about 1,000 cases in total, and that number has, we haven't seen new cases now in the past 2 weeks. So let's go to the next page. And this is a view of our province. It's a lobster, all you guys know, and each flag there represents a different beach that we have supervised by our Nova Scotia Lifeguard Service. And the reason why I'm putting our beaches out there for you guys is because there's been no direction on opening pools, but we are Canada's ocean playground. That's a cheesy line I took from my license plate, actually. I'm laughing to myself because I can't hear anybody, but people are going to go to the beaches this summer, so we're going to be supervising them. If you can go to the next page. So we have 19 supervised beaches in the HRM, and those are lake beaches, and we have 23 supervised beaches. And these are going to be open starting in July. Training camp has already started for our Halifax waterfronts, and our Nova Scotia Lifeguard Service is starting their training camp next week. So, we're gearing up because, if pools aren't open, we know people are going to be going to the beaches. It's usually a low season for us as aquatic facilities. Our swim lessons is usually very small, and our usage is small because people are out at the beaches, and we need to keep those safe. And that's going to be the priority there. And, in talking with NSLS, Nova Scotia Lifeguard Service, and Halifax beaches, they're not going to be policing social distance. We're going to be doing our best to educate people on the distance requirements, but there's no capacity limits outside. We're lucky that most of our provincial beaches on the ocean are quite big, where we're hoping people, can just be smart about it and make their own distance, but we're not going to be policing the rules there. So if you can go to the next slide. So indoor pools. So as I said, there is no date yet for opening our pools. And we're kind of piggybacking the other provinces. Seeing that table that Eric had posted there, we're well aware other provinces have more dates in place. It doesn't mean their pools have opened, but they have dates in place and they're preparing. We're preparing too. And I'll kind of speak more in a second about what we're doing here at my facility. I'm at the pool, just so you guys know. And I'll show you guys kind of some things that we're doing to prepare and what other facilities here in Halifax are doing to prepare. We're still expecting probably a mid-July, early August call from our province. So, and that being all of our pools back to operation in the fall. We don't see outdoor pools opening here, but that could change by the minute. And I'm sure each of you in your other provinces know that things do change quite rapidly, and a second wave could come. So we're just going the best we can. An interesting thing about Nova Scotia too is a lot of our pools. Oh, sorry, you can go back to the first slide I had there. Yeah. A lot of our pools are operated by nonprofits, so certain pools need to submit their own operating plans. So, I mean, Halifax, for instance, has 10 indoor pools, but each pool needs to submit a different plan, and it might have different ways in which they open. So that's great. You can go next slide. So preparing for reopening. What we have done is we've drafted an aquatic safety plan that basically takes all the information from the life-saving reopening guide and blends that into a framework based on what our province has set out. So I've made some bullets here of basically our table of contents of our safety plan that we have made, which starts with your employee health and safety. You know, it's going to be difficult to manage employee sickness now. If someone is reporting these symptoms of anything showing signs of COVID, you know, they can't come to work, and that's going to be difficult for us to manage with lifeguards where we need them here to open. So, you know, kind of protocols in place for your health and safety. What type of hygiene are you having? Your PPE? Did you get your gloves and masks and isolation gowns? I mean, we've been lucky to secure those things, but in talking with other facilities, you know, they haven't been able to get isolation gowns for major emergencies and face shields. So things are scarce. So I recommend you get out there now if you can, because this stuff will be with us for the long run. Definitely the PPE. And so Eric and Mike talked about new first aid procedures as being a priority. So the use of the PPE, if you're going with the BVMs, we were kind of already there before COVID with airway management. And if you can't get BVMs, you know, compression only. Having a facility admission plan where there's one entryway, one exit way is defined in the life-saving plan. So we've done that here, but every pool is different. And, you know, I'll talk in some of the challenges here in a few minutes about, you know, your facility might not be set up that way. And so although it's recommended, you know, it's kind of that difference between obligations. So you really need to see, you know, what works for your facility. You know, and same with the occupancy limits. You know, in our province here, we don't have a limit set by the province. So we've been using the 7 meters squared as recommended in the life-saving document. So disinfection procedures, supervision, safety zones, and that education and rule enforcement, which is going to be the challenge. And taking that and drafting a plan, and we're creating online videos to kind of get the head start. Where actually all of our staff are still laid off, and we're kind of in that waiting game of knowing when we can rehire them back and start doing physical training. So, okay, you can go to the next slide. Some of the things that we've purchased, I'm sure you guys are aware, you know, you might already have these yourself if you're tuned in here. Plastic barriers, floor decals and directional arrows for 2 meter spacing. What's trending right now, and some facilities in Halifax have bought these, are the electrostatic sprayers, which essentially ionizes the disinfectant that you're spraying and doesn't require wiping. So I know a lot of facilities are using these to get a quick disinfection in between swims. All of our swims will be going to booking by phone or online through your recreation software system, and having staggered swims to allow you to go in, do a cleaning on the change rooms. So when I talked there about our 7 meters square per swimmer, that's kind of the standard that we're using in Nova Scotia based on the life-saving recommendations. And again, there's not a one size fits all. We're lucky we have this new facility that has a one-way entry and a one-way exit for our universal change room. It's very large. So we've actually shut down our male and female change and are just focusing on our universal. So let's go to the next slide.
Just about 1 more minute, Scott.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. So I'll just kind of breeze through here. You know, we've had an order from the province to allow lifeguards to not practice social distancing, which basically allows us to do lifeguard training. And we'll just go to the next slide and kind of flip through these. This is just an example of some facility traffic we've set up. And you can kind of keep going through these examples. That's great. Keep going through. Directional flow through your facility, mapping that out yourself. So that's what we've done. And just keep going to the next slide. So I got about probably 20 seconds here. And these can be challenges that I really wanted to frame for you guys for discussion later, but revenue and cost recovery, that's our biggest challenge as this sticks with us through the next year. Employee sickness, or how are you going to run swim lessons the same way? Most of our aquatic facilities in Halifax are limited, so in terms of their design, so you might not be able to get spacing everywhere, and that might be the same for your facility. And that goes with the showering. It may be best for you to not do showers because of the design of your change rooms. And I guess the last thing I'll say is lifeguarding is going to be a more high-risk job. I know our 16-year-old staff might be a little bit more intimidated now, full face shields and isolation gowns. So this may bring some different challenges for us down the road. But that said, I won't go past the 10 minutes so we can save more for discussion at the end. And I'll flip that back to you, Krista. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Some really useful information from all of our speakers. Really appreciate it. And I want to introduce Kathleen Lowe. And Kathleen, we call her K-Lo because we're so well acquainted now. Kathleen began her aquatics career as a lifeguard fresh out of Bronze Cross in the summer of 1999 and hasn't looked back. Currently employed by the city of Winnipeg as the Recreation Services Coordinator, Kathleen has held various aquatic-specific positions, all within municipal government in Manitoba over the past 18 years. She completed a degree in recreation studies from the University of Manitoba and is a proud water safety ambassador with the Canadian Red Cross. So over to you, Kathleen.
Thanks, Krista. Okay, before we get started, we've got a lot of information to cover in 10 minutes. I want to acknowledge that I'm presenting on truly behalf of our aquatics unit for the city of Winnipeg, and it has been a collaborative effort to ramp up plans to reopen some of our outdoor and indoor sites and wading pools this summer. As well, I want to acknowledge that this is very much a plan, and we are in various stages of receiving permission to move forward with our proposals. So things, as I'm sure many of you are experiencing, are changing daily, and so too are our plans. So if we can advance the slide, we can get jumping into this. Okay, so I guess presently in Manitoba, very different situation than a number of provinces. We certainly do consider ourselves to be fortunate in the COVID-19 world. As of this morning, we have 6 active cases, which has increased by 2, I believe, from yesterday. And you can see our recoveries and deaths to date. Next slide, please. Prior to COVID-19 reaching Manitoba, just a quick summary of our operations here. 12 indoor sites, 9 outdoor pools, 81 wading pools, 21 spray pads, and approximately 725 staff. I wanted to note that the Recreation Services Division has actually been going through some pretty significant restructuring. This started last September. So just adding to some of our challenges is truly we're still working through some changing reporting structures and different responsibilities amidst all this change as well. We can advance that slide. Okay, so on March 16th, we were tasked with closing all of our indoor aquatic facilities in light of COVID-19. So that decision, I believe, happened March 13th and over the course of the weekend. Following that, the decision was made to lay off all temporary aquatic employees. So that took place April the 25th. Moving forward, catching us a little bit by surprise, we received a drafted Phase 2 Restoring Safe Services from the province, which identified that pools were falling part of the Phase 2 resumption plan with restrictions. So while we had been with our permanent team members left working, we had been working to make some assumptions on when we might get the green light to go. I don't think any of us was feeling like we'd be receiving that green light as early as June the 1st, which is what the announcement was. So a lot of efforts ramped up, and on June 3rd, we opened up 19 of our 21 unsupervised spray pads. 2 of our indoor sites were actually reallocated to the province as provincial testing sites for COVID-19. So the 2 spray pads that didn't open were tied to those facilities. And then this past Monday, we actually moved forward to begin the recall process of, at this point, 109 temporary aquatic employees, and are making the assumption that that number will grow as we continue down that path. Okay, we can move the slide forward. All right, so looking ahead, and we've recently received the green light to proceed with our resumption plan to reopen 33 wading pools and 8 of our 9 outdoor pools as early as July the 3rd. We can advance the slide. And then looking ahead, we are pushing forward quite quickly in an effort to reopen 2 of our largest multi-use indoor aquatic facilities within the city for our in-city residents. And the plan with this is somewhat phased in a few different areas. So our focus for these sites is on the ability for public to make lane swim reservations, as well as for our aquatic sport groups to be able to access these sites to resume training for primarily high performance athletes, and looking at some of the other club users as well. And then tied to these facilities outside the aquatic lens is the ability for members of the public to come back and access the fitness centers and tracks and that sort of thing at these sites. So I think I'm going to talk a little bit about why at this point we are not considering swimming lessons right off the get-go at our sites. Moving forward as early as August 4th, our indoor resumption plan expands to include swimming lessons and leadership courses potentially. And there's some decisions that still need to be made in order to do that in our province. Okay, we can advance the slide. All right. In terms of the province's Restoring Safe Services Phase 2, I just wanted to spend a little bit of time talking a bit about the key components to this so you get a sense of where we're at. So in terms of social distancing, as seems to be the case throughout Canada, we're looking at that 2-meter distancing with exception to brief exchanges. So in order to assist in achieving this, the decision was landed pretty early on that we would look to hiring additional support at our facilities, and through our rec tech position, or recreation technicians, to actually function as what we're calling social distance educators. So primarily because it's clear in the provincial guidelines that social distancing should not be part of a lifeguard's job. They need to focus on safety supervision of the pools, that this responsibility would fall to these rec technicians. And as well, a secondary role would be to assist with the increased requirements for sanitizing and cleaning of various areas of the facilities. Okay, we can advance this slide. In terms of capacity limitations, I know that Eric touched on this earlier. short of truly our coordinator team, one afternoon we almost decided to go and visit an outdoor site and invite some of our team members to do the same, and map out a social distancing plan to identify what would reasonable limit on capacity look like. So we spent some time really discussing this, looking at our sites, and what we landed on across the board was to cap our attendance at 30% for our outdoor sites to start, and then to truly evaluate this as we reopen to see if it was reasonable to expand that at all, you know, ensuring that social distancing would be reasonably met for our patrons. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, and group lessons. So I mentioned I'd get to this a little bit, and here's the slide where we're going to. So for our fitness component, we made the decision early on, because our indoor sites were closed, to offer enhanced aquafit opportunities at our outdoor sites. We were seeing some successes with that in previous summers, so we built onto that. But in terms of offering the Learn to Swim program through Red Cross, we did consult with the Red Cross. We considered that in past summers, we don't typically offer swimming lessons at our outdoor sites, so that would be a different experience for our customers and for our staff. And then the fact that our indoor resumption plan was moving quite quickly, we landed on keeping the outdoor sites focused on public swim opportunities, on aquafit opportunities, and we are currently exploring how we will be able to resume offering swimming lessons to our city residents as early as August the 4th. And then just to highlight in terms of aquafit that we do require participants to bring their own equipment. Okay, so moving on to change room access. I think Scott alluded to this right at the end of his presentation, that, you know, due to the time in which these outdoor facilities were built, limitations in terms of space is certainly a consideration in these resumption plans, and we felt the same way. It just wasn't reasonable for social distancing to happen in change facilities without vastly reducing the amount of people that could go through that space. So what we landed on was, obviously at some sites, our patrons have to physically walk through the change rooms to get to our pools. And in those cases, it would really act as a thoroughfare. There'd be no access to lockers. We would expect our patrons are coming in their swimwear so that they're not having to change. And then to have limited access to washrooms and shower areas. Okay, next slide. All right, moving into the entrance guidelines. I think in terms of our plan, really to control access, to discourage gatherings, we're relying heavily on having systems in place, and we've truly got a team together that's mapped out how people are going to line up essentially to get into our facility safely. We have extra staff that are going to be scheduled to assist with that process. And everyone will need to be clearly communicated with to understand what that's going to look like. And there's going to be a piece to educating the public as well. So we anticipate a lot of strong communication strategies are going to be necessary in the coming weeks as we ramp up for reopening. Okay, next slide.
And just last minute, Kathleen.
All right, I'll rip through the rest of this here. In terms of entrance guidelines, having a booking system to reserve space. So this, I think, is going to be a big change for a number of places, including us, to help educate the public. We're requiring public, or asking public, to reserve space by 10 p.m. the day prior to attending our facilities. There's a big communication strategy developed in order to assist in educating the public of this change. It's not to say we won't accept on-site walk-ups, is what we're calling them, but it will be strongly discouraged, and their experience will not be the same as somebody who's reserved space in advance. And in terms of, thanks, there we go. We have used ActiveNet, so this is a bit different as well, building public swim activity blocks. So we're looking at 2-hour opportunities for people to reserve space. So basically you show up with your family, you've got 2 hours to swim, and then you leave. And half an hour later, we repeat that process with a new group of swimmers. In between that, there will be extensive cleaning and sanitizing happening. Okay, advance that slide. And really quickly, I touched on this a little bit, the promotion piece to advance reservations. We are exploring cashless payment options at sites that previously were cash only. I think we can advance this slide. And screening, which I think is fairly standard. We're already asking our staff to do this before they report to work sites, and we'll be doing the same with our public. We'll move along. Okay, really quickly on training, I know Mike touched on some of the changes. So we've got a 2-tiered approach to training our staff. One is following our same expectations. When someone is away from work for an extended period of time, they're required to do really a back to work assessment. So all our staff will be going through that process. Our training teams developed a video to capture some of the changes to CPR. And then following that piece, there will be site-specific training for our staff before they start work. Next slide. So I think challenges, not unlike some of the challenges Scott's already identified in terms of equipment and business viability. I think a big one, planning amidst this constant change for a large organization, has posed many challenges for us along the way. Managing expectations and building confidence and support is a huge one as well. In Manitoba, a lot of rural pools are announcing that they're reopening and have already reopened to some capacity, and residents in Winnipeg are expecting the same of us. We have unique challenges because of the sheer magnitude that this requires, and the steps we need to take to identify how we're going to do that. And then space and time constraints. Everyone wants back in, and with social distancing, we know that that just simply won't be possible the way people are used to. So who gets what space and how do we allocate that is another challenge for us. And then finally, and a big one I think that's top of mind for many of us, is the capacity of our staff. We're asking a lot of our staff right now as we walk through this process. We see people are tiring, and we know that this truly is it's for the long haul right now. It's a marathon, not a sprint. So how do we support our teams and ensure that they maintain wellness throughout this process? Thank you. That is the end.
Thank you so much, Kathleen. So much great information. And I know we've run out of time, but I just wanted to make sure that you heard from all of our speakers. And again, they shared so much information today. I'd like to invite all of our speakers back on, and if you have the time to spend another few minutes with us, I am going to take some questions. And then the other thing that we're going to do is we will grab all of the questions that are in the chat box, and we will do our best to get the answers back out to everybody when we share the link with you. So maybe, like I said, I'd like to invite you to stay on if you can for a few more minutes, and we will go through some questions. And then if not, we will be recording this again, so you will have access to the information. So maybe I'll just start with one question. Sorry, let me just go through. When you refer to lanes, how wide is the lane that you are speaking of? I'm not sure who that question is for. I think it's either for Eric or Mike, but I could be lying to you. So when you refer to lanes, how wide is the lane you're speaking of?
I'm going to go ahead. When we were speaking about maximum better loads, I guess this is what we are talking about. Usually we are going for 2.5 meters lane. So this is why we do not think while maintaining a 2-meter physical distancing, you can have swimmers going back and forth in the same lane while keeping the 2-meter distancing. And this is what they are doing in other countries that are only using the 1-meter physical distancing because they can fit them in the lane and still maintaining that distance. So this is why there is a wide variance of square meter per patron when I showed you the slide before.
And Eric, can you just confirm that Swim Canada recommends 6 swimmers per 2 lanes for competitive swim teams?
It is what they are recommending since last Friday. Before that, it was 4 swimmer, but they changed it on last Friday to 6. This is for a 25-meter length of pool, so it's a 50-meter pool, then you double the number.
Thank you. A question, and this is maybe for Scott and for Kathleen. What have facilities been doing to help reduce staff anxiety?
Right now, I mean, for us has been communication, right, and updates and training videos, right, just so you can educate your staff on what's happening. Sometimes when they're not in the loop of the communication, they're kind of anxious of what it is because they hear different things. Oh my God, am I going to be wearing a mask all the time on the pool deck, or these different things, so they don't know. So for us, it's just been weekly updates. You know, our staff actually been laid off. I mean, we've been doing weekly updates, and that's been working for us.
I think with the city of Winnipeg, we too have laid off all of our staff. So as they're returning, I think keeping in constant communication is important. Understanding there's so much propaganda around COVID-19. So just providing the critical messaging and checking in. I know something early on that the city started adopting was a wellness check with our teams. So just checking in to see how everyone's doing and having those frank discussions and clarifying things.
I'd like to just jump in and mention, I think the work that Scott and the province of Nova Scotia has done to get an exemption for lifeguards to be able to train and respond to emergencies may even help with that apprehension that it may feel coming back to the job. So great job in getting that exemption. I know that other provinces like Ontario are working to do the same.
Thank you, Mike. Best practice is the use of the BVM, but given the difficulty in the training online to use it, what are your thoughts on using pocket mask with a viral filter?
Well, I'll start off, and maybe Eric, you want, or others want to jump in. I know that if you look at the standard that was created nationally, it's an option, one of 3 or 4 options that staff can access. And although it is likely one of the best options, we know that they're expensive, they require training, and more commonly, I think you would find lifeguards with pocket masks in their hands. So that's typically the approach that we've done with the guide and with the standards that have been created, by starting off with various options that you can select based on a whole variety of factors to get the job done should you be faced with a unconscious, unresponsive victim. Anyone else want to jump in there?
Yeah, Mike is totally correct. In the information bulletin that we publish for mitigating the risk while doing CPR in a COVID context, we do present 4 ways to do it, and the second way is using the pocket mask. In Quebec, BVM are not used. This is not part of the NL program in Quebec, so this changed from provinces to provinces. So the reality for Quebecers, it was impossible to do all the learning session in the time that we had. So they will be using the pocket mask with a HEPA filter, and this was approved by the health officers of that province.
Thank you. Excuse me. In the Life Saving Society document, Appendix A outlines opening in phases. What recommendations do you have in terms of time in one stage before progressing to the next?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. And again, I'll start off, Eric, if you want to jump in. This appendice is a guideline, a sample of how you might approach a phased-in approach. And I think that even when you look ahead to Appendix B, you see some dates in there. It's important to note that these are simply samples of how you might phase in. And I think if you follow the approach of the guide in following those steps and using the charts A and B in the back as a helpful reminder, you'll move fairly quickly, I think, into reopening. Eric or anyone else?
Yeah, I understand. We received some question about those. Like Mike said, they are really simple, but I think they are useful ones because it helps the manager to prepare on how they can see some reopening. And in some provinces, the health officers were asking to receive those so they can afterwards choose how they're going to be doing the reopening process. So that's what they are intended for.
Great, thank you. Another question, and I'll take just a couple more. If we are teaching lessons under the Life Saving Society, are we having to only teach lessons from level 3 and up? Any answers?
Well, I'll jump in here, and I think that as time goes by, things will change. Initially, certainly in our province, swimming lessons are allowed as long as you maintain physical distancing, or you have a household member who can provide that contact that might be required at certain levels. So, you know, again, how you manage that is up to you. If you want to proceed with levels that typically do not require physical, that do require or allow you to do physical distancing, then go right ahead and do it. If you want to start with the lower levels, then you'll need to address requirements, which will likely be different in different provinces. But here in Ontario, we're still under the stipulation of a 2-meter physical distancing. So.
Thank you, Mike. How are splash pad numbers to be managed? Is anyone allowing only one family at a time to enter?
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, in Manitoba, we have, I think, a little bit lesser restrictions in terms of group gatherings. So it's being self-policed, which essentially means parents show up and it's at their discretion if the numbers exceed our stipulated amount, which I believe is, I'm going to say it's 25. It might have increased to 50 at this point.
So in Quebec, we're only adding signage, so to ask people to maintain the 2-meter distancing, to make sure that if they think they have COVID, not to attend splash pads, of course. They have a bit more disinfection that is being done. Usually there are crews passing about every 4 hours to do disinfection, and they are recommending, but this is not an obligation, to not be using the start button, but let them run all the time. So some cities went for that, others didn't, and they're just doing a bit more disinfection, but it's nothing more than that.
All right, thank you so much to all of the speakers today for 4 excellent presentations, and then for agreeing to stay on and answer some additional questions. As I mentioned, we have recorded this. Everything will be provided to you. There are some handouts that are on this that you can download from the GoToWebinar, and we will also be able to send those out in a link. And if you visit the website, cpra.ca, all this information will be available. And as well, to answer some of the questions that have come up, I encourage you to go to the COVID-19 site. I just wanted to let you know before we finish that we do host, we have hosted a series of 6. This is the second one. We have 4 more to go. The next one is actually coming up next Thursday at noon Eastern time, and it will focus on playgrounds and fields. And again, a free webinar, and you can see the speakers there. So we have Baseball PEI, City of Surrey and BC, and Scott Belair from the Canadian Playground Safety Institute. So if you can join us for that webinar, we hope that you will be able to. And again, my thanks to 4 great speakers and to you today for your participation, for joining us for the last hour and actually a bit. So thank you again to everybody. I hope you have a great day.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye, everyone.